Hey everyone, welcome back to Innovation Unplugged, where we uncover stories behind breakthrough technologies and innovators shaping the future. I'm your host, Jim Brasmitsis, and today we're diving into the world of modern data with Expanso, a company that's driving efficiency and scalability for data-driven enterprises. Expanso is redefining how businesses manage and utilize data in real time, enabling smarter decision-making and improved operational performance using that data at the edge. And if you're ready to explore how this innovation in data solutions is transforming industries, well, let's get unplugged. Welcome, David. It's fantastic to have you on the show today, my friend.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, David, as you know, this podcast series is really about speaking to enterprise customers who are really having challenges. And data is one of those big transformative opportunities for the enterprise. It always has been, in my humble opinion, and you and I spent time at Microsoft, so we kind of know that world really well. But a lot of the data that they have is usually way, way far out on their edge, right? Whether it's in an operations center, a distribution center, or manufacturing, whatever it is. And moving that data in and trying to make sense of it so you can operationalize and drive more efficiencies is a real challenge today. So I'd love to just start with, what was the reason behind Expanso? What was the sort of the spark of why it was necessary to build the capabilities you've all built? And what big problems are you helping enterprises solve today?
You oftentimes come up with something in your life and then realize you've kind of been working on it for like 10 years and you didn't really realize it. I was very, very early on at Kubernetes in Google. I was the first non-founding PM. And I also started Kubeflow while I was there, both very distributed, data-heavy projects. And in both cases, we would very often hear from customers, hey, I have this Kubernetes cluster, or I have this distributed cluster, but I don't just have one, right? I have one for each zone or each region or each cloud. How do I merge them together, or how do I treat them all like one? Because those platforms, and they are amazing platforms, we are not a replacement for them by any stretch, but those platforms don't work across latency boundaries. That is how they're designed. That's not a bad thing. It's just how they're designed. And so we kept telling people, well, you could do this, or you could, contort it in the following way. And that is for sure something that is possible with these platforms. But why not use something that is built for this? And it's funny, you mentioned the word edge. Like, honest to God, I like to say, once you have introduced an Ethernet cable, congratulations, you now have a distributed system or edge, right? Because you now have two things that need to talk to each other where the network will, not may, will go down, right? And because networks go down, that is how TCP is built, right? Now, it's resilient. The network protocol is resilient. Can your distribution layer be resilient as well? So there's a long way of saying, I've been hearing this problem for years. I have this data. I have these compute. It's spread out all over the place. Like I said, cross zone, cross region, cross cloud. How do I make it easier to build? For years, I just said, here's how you architect things to make it easy, but you're going to have to write this layer of stuff. Now I'm saying, hey, use our platform. That's what it's there for.
Yep. So much of the data that enterprises have has always really been on the edge. David, if you remember back when you and I were at Microsoft, we used to call that branch computing, if you remember, from way back.
Absolutely.
It's just come on with it. It's the same thing with a different name.
File and print servers, man. That was like the bread and butter of
right.
like in back offices. That was the bread and butter for Microsoft for years, and
right.
justifiably, it provided so much value.
It did, and the data there provides a ton of value too. Now there's this whole other world of AI, computer vision, machine learning, and all the other fun stuff. And a lot of that, I wouldn't say a lot of it, but it has required centralizing that data. Well, and I know, moving all that data into some centralized private cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, in some cases, doable. In other cases, just not, for a whole host of reasons, right? Cost, privacy, security, whatever those cases are. What Expanso has done, being built on the back end of Bacalhau, which is the open source project, I'd love to have you just say a few words about that. But what you have done is given those clients the capability to actually run queries on data at source, where it is, right? Rather than make that big move. And I think that is really important today, because we're only going to continue becoming more of a distributed enterprise, right? Longer term, centralization makes sense in some areas, but not much. But maybe you can kind of touch upon that reality.
So first, I like to. I always recommend startups and innovators and things like that to build into things that are as immutable as possible, right? Meaning they'll just never change. I don't care if the laws of physics changed. Like this is just always going to be true. And the three things that I think are immutable that we're building into: one, data is growing, no question. It will always grow. And it will grow everywhere, right? 68% of all data is enterprise data is stored outside of a traditional data center, right? So you're probably already having this. You're like, well, no, no, no. I have everything in US West. Yeah, but do you? You have people's laptops. You have stuff on phones. You have whatever temperature sensors and thermostats and whatever, right? That data is there too. And are you doing anything with it? So the data is always growing. Number one. Number two, the networking will never keep up, and that's usually just because of speed of light issues, right? Like you're not going to make the speed of light faster. You can increase bandwidth some, but as long as the things need to communicate back and forth, you're gated, right? And it will always be that way. And then the third is the mutable thing is regulations are always increasing, right? So with those three things around moving the data, being smart about how you move it is the most important. In my many years of IT, the number one failure that I would see is when you had someone who was a hammer and treated everything like a nail, right? And it is great. There, no one is saying get rid of hammers. No one is saying get rid of nails. But like, hey, maybe this thing could use a different thing, right? And I like to say that that's where we really plug in. So Bacalhau, as you mentioned, is the open source platform. The code is open source. The binaries are commercial. That's what you license when you get with Expanso. We build it. We can compile it for you. Give you an SBOM. We make it supportable and all that kind of good stuff. You can download. You can fork the code and use it, compile it to yourself, and use it to your heart's content. That's what open source is all about. But we feel like we have a product that really adds that all together. The platform is designed to do distributed compute over data, which means you can take portions of your ETL job, your ETL pipelines with extract, transform, and load pipelines. Those are the things where people are ingesting and changing it or scanning it or removing bad data or whatever. You could take portions of those, which you're absolutely doing today, and move them near to where your data is. And so, we are working with a top 50 website who's able to show 98%, that is not an exaggeration, 98% savings on amount of data moved, purely on regular logs. And the reason is because so much of the logs don't provide you any value. Now, I'm not saying throw it away. Go toss it in an iceberg or whatever. That's there forever. But if you could just do an initial analysis, an initial scanning, schematization, compression, or whatever near where the thing is, and again, in this particular case, there's no edge to it. They're just in 40 different zones on AWS, and they just want to do some processing before it lands in Snowflake. They are not getting rid of Snowflake. They're not changing their ETL pipeline. They're not doing anything. They're just taking this low portion and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to run that next to the data instead of, once it gets into Snowflake, because it makes it more efficient. It makes Snowflake more efficient. I don't have a lot of raw stuff in there. I don't have bad data in there, so on and so forth. And that's what we really provide, is a way for you to do that with, I'm not going to, paint a magic wand and say no changes, but it should be very small amount of changes. You just get huge amounts of efficiency and massive cost savings.
Yep. Now, I'd love using this forum to talk about where products like yours have made a real big impact. And you just mentioned top 50 website in the world. One of the other, and I think this is a public use case, is the work you've all done with the city of Las Vegas. And keep me honest on this, 15,000 cameras in the city itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Petabytes of data,
absolutely.
Some of which that they have to store, and they can't leave the city limits, right? It has to stay within the city limits. So customers like the city of Las Vegas in this world aren't able to do much with that data until you guys came along. So maybe if you can you share a little bit about the construct of that opportunity?
Absolutely. I mean, you touch on something that's so funny, and I'm sure your listeners probably experience this as well. Gartner says 60%, that's 60% of all enterprise data is just unused. meaning they're collecting it and they're just not doing anything with it. And you know why. City of Las Vegas is a perfect example. They have cameras all over the place. Right now, the cameras go to individuals who, I'm sure you've all seen it. They have a giant screen laid out with little squares all over the place, and they're just like sitting there, security guard watching it for, 4 hours at a time. And then they do a walk around, and then they watch it for another 4 hours. I'm not dismissing that, right? Like somebody's got to do it. But at the end of that, maybe they save it on a hard disk for a week and then they toss it. And the reason is because if you were to aggregate all of those 15,000 cameras, you're talking about 4.1 petabits a day of total volume, right? So, I'm not blaming the city of Las Vegas for not doing something with it. 4.1 petabits a day would bankrupt Google or Microsoft, right? Like, you can't store that. What you need to do is be thoughtful. What are you looking to get out of this? What is worth keeping around? Hey, look, if this is the same picture as it was the previous 700 frames, maybe you only need to save one frame because it's the exact same picture. Things like that are certainly possible. But you can only do that when you've done an initial analysis of that data. And so in this particular case, they are using us with models nearby those cameras to do initial analysis and do slip and fall analysis, car accident, a person where a person shouldn't be at a certain time window. Like they're able to do initial things. They're not, dispatching the police immediately when something happens, but they're using that model to simply flag it and say, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going on here, or something is bad in this situation, right? Either one. Either the model works and they know what it is, or the model says, hey, you know what? I'm throwing up my hands. I can't figure out what's going on here. But it is different, so maybe someone should take a look. And now a human being, they can store it, and they can all, because it's so much smaller, but they can also have a human being be flagged on a more real-time basis because they know that human being is not going to be like exhausted 2.5 hours into their shift, trying to, sip coffee just to stay awake. So that's where it's much more about making better use of the data by processing it more closely to where it is. And in this particular case, as I mentioned, you had these cameras. Previously, those cameras would go to peer monitors. Now they're putting small servers, 2U servers, spread around the city. They look like those transformers, like power transformers. They just put them in a box in the ground with some, pylons around them, then they just run servers there, and those are remote servers. They have them spread all over the city, and then clusters of cameras going to those local things where they ultimately process the video.
Yep. Now I know GDPR does not apply to the city of Las Vegas in the true sense of the word because it's a European thing, but they do comply with trying to keep that data inside
Absolutely.
the city limits. I think they're required to. How important is that to other clients to be able to actually maintain the source of that data where
I mean,
it's at
it is
versus
enormously important, and both because I don't want to like shame anyone, but like the number of times I've gone into a customer and walked through an architecture with them, and gotten to the end of it, and I was like, I'm not going to write this down, but like this thing you're doing over here, is technically illegal. So you probably don't want to do that. Now it's not illegal, right? Like nobody's committing crimes, but they are taking, for example, non-anonymized or non-sanitized data and moving it across a boundary where they're not allowed. Now, again, nobody is doing this maliciously. Like I've yet to hear anyone say like, "Oh yeah, no one's going to catch us." No, they're always like, "Oh, I actually wasn't even aware." Like, do you know that if you're in Europe and you are in a GDPR region, if you have one customer in a GDPR region and one customer who is not in a GDPR region, technically speaking, again, a lot of this is lawyer stuff, but so do not take this as legal advice. But technically, based on readings from our lawyers, you actually have to have two databases, completely separate databases. Having a separate table, having a separate server, not enough. Separate databases, according to like certain readings. Now, everyone's different. I'm sure that you're going to get your many viewers like weighing in. I'm not trying to give you advice, but I'm saying like A regulator could say that. And so that's where like the other half of our architecture is so important. Um, all that thing about processing the data and so on and so forth at the edge or on-prem or things like that means you also get a audit log showing the data never moved, right? You can say to any regulator, hey, you know what? Here's my whatever Spanish citizen logging into your website. Where did their log stuff go? And you can say, look, it went right here. And here's the processing we ran on it to sanitize it, remove their name and all that stuff. And then it went off from there. But you could see that, and there it went. Which again, is not, you can do this yourself. But if you execute through our platform, you get that for free, which is, pretty nice.
Yep. This goes without saying, but Expanso clearly cloud native, cloud friendly, hybrid friendly.
Absolutely.
A client could decide to run this in the cloud, in their cloud, in
Yep.
some hybrid cloud. You're like water. You go anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. We're really lucky. I steal a lot from my previous experience on things like Kubernetes, where I think that one of the things they did best was they understood where they were in the kind of like overall topology. And they were absolutely religious about saying we're not doing anything outside of where we are. Meaning, they didn't come up with their own network. They didn't come up with their own storage system. They didn't come up with, application workflow layers and things like that. There are Kubernetes native things that do that, but that's outside the box. It integrates very well, but outside the box. That's what we're trying to do with Bacalhau as well, and Expanso as well. We are the job orchestrator. We will read in from S3 or your local disk or a website or a Git repo. We have that native integration. We also can be used underneath workflow engines, and we have proofs of concept with partnerships with Flight and Airflow and other folks like that. So you can use us that way as well. But we're not building that in natively. We're just plugging in, and we say whatever you can containerize, whatever you can turn into a WASM application, whatever you can deploy. It could be a raw binary. I don't care. Use grep for all I care. We can orchestrate your job, get it there, run it reliably, and then when it's done, give you a very clean API to tell you it's done. And that right there, like, adds a lot of value.
You mentioned earlier, I'm going to try to stitch two things together because there's a point to doing this. But you mentioned earlier a Gartner stat that said 60% of all enterprise data goes unused. Yet we're in a world where AI or Gen AI or machine learning is a buzz, right? And where I've seen enterprises make investments is not just in the LLMs, but it's in about understanding their data as a competitive differentiation. I've always said every every industry is a data industry. Every industry, doesn't matter what it is. How important is what you're all doing today to an enterprise's AI journey longer term?
Yeah, I will say that I know that I'm talking my book here, so again, take it with a grain of salt. But like, I think that it could not be more important, right? Let for folks listening to this, think about this. Every LLM, everything like that, has been trained on completely public data, right? And to be clear, it's all been trained on the same public data, right? That doesn't make them bad. It just means that they will ultimately converge because the public data is the public data. And they say all over the place, hey, we are not training on private data. You know what you provide, unique value you provide as an enterprise is your data because you're the only one who has that, right? So, sure, you can integrate with an LLM, but taking it the next phase where you're taking that LLM and fine tuning it or augmenting it with your own private data, that's where the differentiation begins to happen. And that's where you're going to get an order of magnitude output better than you would if you're using just an off the shelf thing. Now, the problem with that is, and again, obviously, you have to lean in. I have to lean into my business, but like part of it is now that you've trained this thing, how do you get it into the places where you really need to get it to? Whether or not it's like on a machine that people can host, like a hosted internal machine that people can use. Maybe you're going to spread it across many machines to improve the reliability. Maybe it's an edge or a distributed model where you're going to take it and downscale it to be the form factor that you need and push it out to branch offices or partner organizations or all the way to edge and IoT devices. That's where, it's that cartoon where it's like a miracle happens here, right? So many people are focused right now on that upper left side. Hey, we're just going to focus this model. We're going to build this model. It's going to change the world. Great. Then, we're going to use the model, right? And in between there is like, ooh, there's a weird space. And, it's a lot like the DevOps and ML ops work in the past. There is a real complexity around how you package this thing and then how you roll it out. And that's something that we are experts in and really like take a lot of pride in helping people do efficiently and within their existing infrastructure.
Absolutely. Let's talk industries just for a moment, David. Which, in your experience, which industries are moving faster in this direction of the edge and AI and such
Yeah.
that you've seen? I'd love to get your perspectives on that. I would assume perhaps industries that do remote sites like mining or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
manufacturing, that sort of thing. But I'd love to get your perspective on what you're seeing industry wise.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge. I mean, it's a good challenge to have as a startup CEO, but like it's also a little bit of a challenge because we do see so many people who have the ability to like take AI or take ML or even just take distributed data and operate much more efficiently. And so that goes back to that top 50 website. These are some of the best software engineers in the world, and yet they are seeing huge opportunities to do that. But your point, where I see it the most is where you have these two giant categories of problems. Category one is where they are collecting the data, but the round trip between for moving that data to a central location, processing it, getting awareness, and then taking action on it is too long, right? So think energy sector, think self-driving cars, automotive, things like that. Think we already talked about city of Las Vegas. Video is a really big one. Security is a really big one. Again, let's pretend for the sake of argument that the bandwidth is there and the storage is there. Again, you can't make the speed of light faster. You can't move it faster than the slowest pipe in your network. And so being able to take action there more quickly is hugely valuable. The city of Las Vegas cannot wait 6 hours for a processing on a video stream because that they can't take any action. So that where it takes a long time just due to the speed of light. The second is cost, right? I was talking with a satellite producer just yesterday morning, and they pay about $500,000 a year for 80 gigabytes of total download traffic. 80, right? And so there, like the cost is so prohibitive that and to be clear, they're paying it right now, right? But the cost savings not so it's not prohibitive because they are paying it and they're seeing value when it is. But the cost savings is so enormous that it just lights a fire under everyone. So that's a big opportunity as well. And so I think it's those two areas where you see those. You touched on one that I think is also super powerful. We talk about like if you had infinite bandwidth, the speed of light is the gate. But the reality is, and we'll get to the third. This is the third one where you don't have infinite bandwidth, right? Again, going back to the satellite producers, they sit both on the cost side, but they also sit on the availability side. For example, a satellite might be over a given base station for an hour. And then where are they the rest of the 23 hours? They're not over that base station, right? They're somewhere else in the earth. So you're going to need to figure out a way to download, schematize, synchronize that data. And it'd be nice to do some of that during those 23 hours when it's not available. You mentioned mining. You mentioned just about anything where it's outside of the core of a city where you're on 4G, if you're 5G, if you're lucky, 3G probably. Where it's just the connectivity is bad. And so you're going to need a system that understands how to be reliable about that. And again, I really want to keep coming back and stressing, like we are not the panacea either, right? It's got to be one of these things where you're like, okay, we already have this centralized system. How do we augment this centralized system in the lowest friction way possible, where we can take it and put it here and here and here, and make our overall pipeline more efficient. And that's really what we're trying to lean into.
Excellent. David, we covered a ton of ground, no pun intended, in a short amount of time. Thank you so much. I think this has been a great podcast for uncovering those opportunities at the edge. It's always been there, but it's more important today in the day of how transformative and differentiated and competitive data is for an enterprise.
Yeah,
And making
absolutely.
sense of that with the
Absolutely.
tooling that we're seeing in AI and Gen AI and machine learning and all that fun stuff. It's always been there, but more so now than ever. And the action that Expanso is right in the middle of, helping clients like the city of Las Vegas, satellite providers, and others in addressing these gaps. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate a really, really awesome conversation. Thank
Yeah.
you. Appreciate
Awesome.
that.
Well, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come on. I love supporting stuff like this, and especially on podcasts I actually listen to, which is great.
We love having you as well. So we're going to wrap up today's conversation with David from Expanso. Thank you again for showing us how Expanso is helping businesses unlock the power of their data with smarter, scalable solutions. For our listeners, if you're inspired by what you've heard, be sure to follow Expanso's journey. And also, take a look over at Bacalhau and the open source project there, because there's a very vibrant community of developers who are very active in that space as well. Here on Innovation Unplugged, we bring you the stories and insights driving the future of technology in enterprises. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a review. We'd love reading them, love hearing and improving the podcast. And please do share this episode with anyone who's passionate about leveraging data to transform their business. Until next time, keep innovating and stay unplugged. And David, thanks again, my friend.
My pleasure.